Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Sims, and I'm your current president of the Monroe County NAACP, and my job is to welcome you all today. Now, we'll get to that, but I kind of want to get off script. There's something that's on my heart today. We do know that this is election time. NAACP, as you know, is nonpartisan, but don't ever get that confused with us being apolitical. So what I want you to understand is that, and we're not going to get into specifics, but I heard something this morning that really resonated with me, and democracy is on the ballot. Okay, just think in those terms. Democracy is on the ballot. Okay, I'll get back on script now. Again, I'm with the NAACP, and I think it's important with you all gathering here that we just state our mission. What it is that we're about. And it is as follows. Our mission is to achieve equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination, and accelerate the well-being, education, and economic security of Black people, all persons of color, and all people. That is our mission. That is what we work tirelessly toward, and one of the reasons that we're gathered here today. Now, I also want to thank our school subcommittee, and that's the group that really pulled this together, this event. And you'll hear from them as we go on, so I won't use the time for that. But I am so grateful that they chose to do this. Lastly, it is so important to get community together to just have civil discussions about issues. One of the things, and you all don't know this, I was raised by my grandmother, me and my brothers. She had an 8th grade education, yet one of the wisest women I've ever known. One of the things that she told me that stuck with me is, the good Lord gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Now, that has stuck with me through my Eagle Scout days, through my leadership fraternity, through all the way up to city council and to what I do now. So I'm asking this group, let's listen. Use your mouth to share your opinions because they're important, but we have to listen to each other and consider each other's opinions, and we will work towards some solutions that we're headed toward. Lastly, today, Brown, 70 years post-Brown. Now, just for a little bit of background for those who may not know, before Brown versus Board of Education, there was this court case called Plessy versus Ferguson. And what it established was that it was constitutional to have separate but equal schools. So that's how you had colored schools, and they weren't allowed to go to white schools. Okay, that was in the late 1800s. The early 1950s, then we had the court case, which was Brown versus Board of Education. Now, that's Oliver Brown, who sued the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education because he wanted his daughter to go to a white school and her admission was denied. And so he filed suit. Now, the Supreme Court, led by, on our side, Mr. Thurgood Marshall, determined that separate but equal, that doctrine was inherently unconstitutional because you could not be, it was inherently unequal. Separate is inherently unequal. That was 7 years ago. So we're moving forward. We've had some challenges, some bumps, and some successes. So we're going to talk later on today about where have we come from them or from that time and where can we move forward. So without any further ado, as everyone gets seated, I'll turn the meeting over to Ruth Eit. Ruth is the chair of our school subcommittee. But I am so thankful for Ruth and all the work that we're all doing. And without further ado, Ms. Ruth Eit.
Hi, I have to talk on script here. So I am Ruth Eit, and on behalf of the Monroe County NAACP Education Subcommittee on Schools, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. A deadly race riot in Springfield, Illinois was the tipping point that led to the creation of the NAACP on February 12, 1909. Since its founding, the NAACP has been on the front lines of the fight for civil rights and social justice. This afternoon, we come together to reflect on the 1954 landmark case, Brown versus Board of Education, which was brought by the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, headed by Thurgood Marshall. In Brown versus Board of Education, as President Sims has just said, the Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in schools was unconstitutional. As we honor this historic decision, we also recognize and lament that 70 years later, equitable education remains a goal, not a reality. Today, we come together to consider what actions we can take individually and collectively to work for equitable quality education for all youth in Monroe County. Your familiarity with the NAACP, with Brown versus Board of Education, and with ongoing inequities in our country and in our county likely depends on many factors, such as your age, the color of your skin, where you have lived, your gender, your line of work, your economic status, your personal experiences, whether you have children or grandchildren in the schools, what you have heard from your family and friends, and what you are intentionally learning. You, like me, may not be confronted with the inequities so many in our community face on a regular basis. You may have the option of overlooking this injustice. Let us all be willing to see and acknowledge these ongoing inequities so that we can take action to dismantle them. In February of this year, the Monroe County NAACP and the IU chapter of the NAACP co-sponsored a Founders Day event, during which one of our panelists, Mrs. Vivian Bridgewaters-Gray, facilitated a community input session. That session identified increasing the awareness of each other's history as one way to improve social inclusion. Today's event was motivated in part by that suggestion. We are grateful to our panelists who will share their expertise and their lived experiences so that we can learn and be inspired to action. Another of our panelists, Ms. J.L. Davis, together with other MCCSC students, spoke to the NAACP about racism they were experiencing in school. Their voices led to the formation of the Education Subcommittee that's hosting today's event. Since the students spoke up, MCCSC has adopted an anti-racism policy and an equity-centered sexual identity and gender-inclusive policy. Our schools exist in our communities. How can we support students, families, and educators as they work to align reality with policy? Hopefully, today, together, we will identify actions that will contribute to the work of transforming the future. After the panel gives their remarks and responds to questions, we had planned to break into small groups, but we'll see what our moderator decides. Maybe we'll stay in this room collectively. What we hope to do is to identify some of these actions that we might take, and then to come back together and share what those are. If you haven't already done so, please sign in so that you can get an email after the event where we'll share out some of what we've heard and also offer some follow-up materials. There is going to be a recording by CATS, which is very much appreciated, as quite a few people were interested in attending but are out of town and not able to be here. So thank you for coming and for caring. And please welcome our moderator, Dr. Gloria Howell, who's going to introduce our panelists.
Good afternoon. Coffee is important. Okay, hope everybody's doing well. Can we first give Ruth a round of applause? Ruth likes to work in the background, but since I'm the moderator, that means I get to foreground her. She is the chair of the NAACP MCC SC Schools Subcommittee, and she works tirelessly to make sure that we're focused on bringing this community together in ways that create equitable outcomes for youth, whether they're in MCCSC or in other schools actually here in the city of Bloomington. And she does so much, and I'm just so grateful for her leading us and putting this together. And there's several other of the school's subcommittee folks that you'll see here and hear from shortly. So I just wanted to make sure that we named that today, and thank you, Ruth, from all of us. I'll give you another round. All right, so I'm excited about this conversation, so much so that I wore my Product of Public Schools shirt. I just wanted to model that for you all. Because schools are so important, and so for me personally, and I'm sure for everyone in here, how we were educated, and we've heard so much about education being the key to the future and those types of things. And so it's only right that we have this conversation on such a milestone as this. So to reiterate what others said, I hope that we take this opportunity to see what we can do both individually and collectively to make quality education something that's a reality for all of our children, no matter what their background or their circumstances are. So with our panel, I'm so excited to have this esteemed lineup here. And so their bios are actually on the NAACP website. You should check it out. So I'm not gonna read all of their bios, but I just wanna tell you a little bit about who they are. First, we have Frank Motley. And Frank is, he first joined the Maurer Law School in 1977 after working at Columbia and Amherst colleges. He's a graduate of the Columbia College and Columbia Law School. He's taught all kinds of courses, and we're actually working with him now to plan a law school application workshop. So not only does he, has he taught, but he's also willing to give back of his time and energy to help students who are interested in applying for law school. As Dean for Admissions from 1977 to 2015, he admitted nearly 5,000 students, more than half of Indiana Law's living alumni base. Frank retired from the law school in 2015. He's currently teaching in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies. Thank you, Frank, for being with us. And next we have Miss Vivian Bridgewaters Gray. You heard her name mentioned earlier. Vivian was born right here in Bloomington as the youngest of 9 children to the late Albert and Elizabeth Bridgewaters. She's wife to the late Michael Gray Sr. and stepmother to Michael and Marcus Gray. She began her professional career in 1975 at RCA's Consumer Electronics Division, moved to Digital Equipment Corporation in 1984, and joined SmithKline Beecham in Philadelphia in the fall of '95 as their group materials manager. She retired in 2004 as Vice President of Procurement North America. Vivian is dedicated to making the lives of ordinary people better through programs that meet them at their point of need. Her transition from mainstream corporate sector allowed her to support community-based efforts while continuing to deliver procurement and business solutions. And she was a member of several boards and community organizations. Thank you, Ms. Vivian. Next, we have Dawan Pearson. Dawan is a senior graduating in May from Indiana University. He's currently studying kinesiology on the pre-med track, so he keeps incredibly busy. He is a native of Indianapolis, Indiana. He currently serves as the president of the IU Bloomington chapter of the NAACP. He's also very active and on the leadership team for the African Students Association, as well as the IU student government. And he's an active student, as I said, he's an active student leader on campus and also serves as a Q in the, what is Q again? Community educator, right? Yes, community educator in the residence hall on campus. So thank you, Dawan, for being with us. And finally, last but not least, had such a good conversation with JL as we were getting started, as she told me about all the schools that she's applying for. Some people in this room would be happy to know that she is considering going to an HBCU for her undergraduate studies, but we won't tell everything. We'll let you go into that. So JL, this young lady is doing a lot. She's a senior at Bloomington High School South, where she's president of the Black Culture Club and also the editor-in-chief of South's yearbook, The Gothic, and a member of the National Honor Society. She's been recognized for her leadership and activism with multiple awards, including the most recent recipient of the Outstanding Black Leader of Tomorrow Award for the city of Bloomington, as well as the Swagger Award recipient for exceptional leadership and social justice activism, as Ruth mentioned earlier, by advocating for a racial discrimination justice policy in the MCC SC Student Handbook. Thank you, JL, for being here. You'll hear more from her as well. So we've asked all of our panelists to just kind of open up and talk about something very specific to their own experiences and expertise. So we're gonna start with Frank and then go down the line. And once they finish giving you just a little snippet, and this is also another way for them to introduce themselves to you based upon their work and the things that they're interested in, and then we'll go into Q&A. So Frank, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'll start reading what I wrote. Once upon a time, the world was divided formally into colors, black and white. White people went to white schools, black people went to black schools, separate and in principle equal. They were equal in theory, but not in fact. Once upon a time that many of you cannot imagine and many of you cannot forget. Once upon a time. It was a time called Jim Crow. It was a time of legally permitted segregation brought on by the infamous Plessy versus Ferguson case, a case that enshrined the principle of separate but equal. In actuality, it was a time of separate and never equal. While the North had won the Civil War, it was the South that won the peace. It was not peace for black people, it was a period of institutionalized terror, sold out by the Republicans after the election of 1876 in order to win the presidency. Rutherford B. Hayes ordered the federal troops out of the South, and with that went any protection of the newly freed ex-slaves. And for a second, I said I would go over to give a background of what life was like under Jim Crow. And there are people in this room that know better than me what that was like. And I'd just like you to say amen if you hear something that rings true. Under Jim Crow, half the police force were Klansmen. There were trumped up charges like reckless eyeballing. You were called an uppity Negro. That was the worst thing to be called. You could not serve on juries. You couldn't testify against a white man. Socially, they called adults boy and girl. In some sections of some parts of the South, you had to get off the sidewalk as white people came down. There were whole cities in the South and here in Indiana, which they called sundown towns. When you went to the stores, you couldn't try on clothes. You could not eat in restaurants. You had to get the food out of the back. You had to sit in the back of the bus. You had to give up your seat when white people came. There were separate water fountains, separate restrooms. The schools were underfunded. The teachers were poorly paid. And some schools only funded schools up to the 10th grade, while the white schools were funded all the way to 12th. In the South, the issue was you had separate but equal schools, but they didn't have any graduate schools. So many blacks had to go north to school, and some people ended up here in Indiana because of that benefit, so to speak. At jobs, the story was, as you know, they were last hired, first fired. The jobs available for you were pretty much, they were really Negro jobs or black jobs at the time, because primarily it was the agricultural society in the South, and you either picked cotton or you did other menial jobs. The opportunity after slavery, they put you off the plantation and put you into tenant farming, where you sharecropped, where you had to work all year for the white man and then turn in so many parts of your crops. You couldn't use the bank, and if you did use the bank, they gave you usurious loans. Some of you heard of the Green Book. Well, you know, when you went down south, and many people who had gone north, then to go down the south in the summer, You had to find a green book that would tell you where you could sleep, where you could get a hotel, where you could get something to eat. If you were lucky to get some money and some property you wanted to buy, you had to deal with redlining. Some people had the benefit of the GI Bill, but in the South in particular, you didn't get to use it. So it was not a good time. And in that context, and the most important thing for most Black people is education. And we still believe that this is the way out, this is salvation, education. And the NAACP trying to do in many regards how to help Black people get out of this separate Jim Crow era, decided to embark upon a campaign to integrate the schools. And it really wasn't starting to integrate the schools to provide better education. And the decision was made that we had to educate the Supreme Court, that it was not just tangible issues about amount of money that they gave to Black schools and white schools, but there were intangible factors. And in order to educate the court, they decided to go at the graduate level to show them that graduate education was providing the same resources was not the same if you didn't provide the same opportunity to interact with students. So they educated the court, established some cases in which the court said that providing equal facilities was not sufficient given the nature of graduate school education, and that the only way to solve that was to integrate them. And after educating the court to that fact, they decided they would go full throttle at segregation of all the schools, all public schools. But there was a challenge there. Thurgood and Hastie and Charles Hamilton Houston had to make a decision, because you could argue that you want separate but equal. That's the law of the land. And you just could argue, make us equal. Give us the same resources as you give to white schools. Or they could say, we want to integrate the schools, and you have to argue that separate is not inherently equal. The decision was made to go for separate, but it's inherently unequal, partly because if you argued, give us the same resources, you'd have to argue them in every county and every school district in the country, and that would be just too expensive. The other factor is there was no belief that the white community would give equal facilities to the Black community, especially in the South. And the problem with going that way is if you did reach integration, what one predicted did happen. Two things. One, the students would be in peril. They'd be going to these schools where they're not welcomed. And as you saw in Little Rock, they'd be in danger of their lives. And the second thing is that it was not clear that the Supreme Court would, it was not clear that the president would enforce this order to integrate the schools. And lastly, the other factor is teachers would lose their jobs. And in fact, it was estimated about 35,000 Black teachers lost their jobs shortly after integration. One might have argued that the court was pretty evenly divided, but people who were for integration and people who were reluctant to do that, given the change of values in the system. But between the first hearing and the second hearing that was given in this case, Earl Warren, who was the governor of California, was selected as chief judge, and he was able to persuade his other judges that they didn't need a split decision on this issue. They needed to have a unanimous decision, and he was able to persuade the other 8 justices that there should be a unanimous decision holding that separate but not equal did not apply in the field of education. We're going to talk later on about whether that was a good or bad decision, how people feel about that now. But I just wanted to give a few moments to think back to how it was in the good old days.
Thank you, Frank. Ms. Vivian, we'll go to you next.
Okay. Well, a little bit of backdrop along with what Frank was speaking to. In Bloomington, Indiana, where I was born and raised and was educated, okay? If we go back to 1915, Banneker was opened as the new, quote unquote, colored school, because there was a colored school before the Banneker. But even at that same time, just so you get a flavor for what it was like here, movie called The Nigga was showing downtown on the square at the Princess Theater. So Bloomington has always been a little bit of an enigma. You'll have some steps that appear to be forward thinking compared to some of the other places in the country. But at the same time, you have that undercurrent of not always even subtle racism that is true to the city. So around the 1940s, Bloomington began to integrate certain things that they felt was to their benefit. Sports has always been a big thing in Indiana. And in Bloomington, like the rest of the state, people want to win. So they began integrating the athletic associations in the 1940s, or I shouldn't say associations, the teams. They were letting young Black kids from, the West Side neighborhood, et cetera, participate in basketball, football. Yet, even in that context, thinking a step forward, but we don't want to allow any of the Blacks to come forward for quarterback because we don't believe that Blacks have the intellectual capacity to be quarterback. How could they learn the plays? How could they think quickly enough to do what they needed to do? So you still have that, yes, it is, but no, it ain't kind of atmosphere. So Bloomington, again, before we got to Brown versus Board of Education, decided that they were going to integrate the public schools in Bloomington in 1951. Not because they felt that the education should be equal or that we're concerned about the learning of, the young Blacks in our city or in our county, but money was funny. And so the state never did fund the colored school. The funding for the colored school came out of a small portion of city property tax money. And then those that were running the school and the Black churches had fundraisers to try to keep the school going. Well, as they decided they wanted to expand, build another annex or whatever on some of the other quote unquote white schools, the money that was being provided for the colored school, they wanted it back. So they did close Banneker in 1951. They did integrate the public schools in Bloomington. And even though, they had integrated the public schools in 51, prior to that, they still allowed Blacks to go like to the university or, some of the other higher schools of higher education. But you were still not integrated. You sat in the back of the room, and as many of us know at IU even today, you have the mural of the Klan on the wall in the Wilburn Hall. So, but anyway, 51, they did integrate the schools. And I didn't get on the scene till 52. So I went back and talked to some of my friends that were at Banneker and did make that transition to Fairview. And it was rough. As they walked up to Fairview School from the neighborhood, adults would holler the N-word out the window and, throw a pop can or pop bottle at them as they walked up the street. They were harassed at school and bullied at school to the point where sometimes they wouldn't even want to go out to recess because they didn't want to face, the issues that they were going to be confronted with on the playground. And the thing that was the most impactful to them was not that the children acted out. It was that the teachers and the adults did nothing about it. So they allowed them to continue, to be victims per se in that way. So in 1954, when we actually came forward with integration, in a greater way, the Banneker became what they called a West Side Community Center back then. And it was like a refuge for young Black kids, as well as poor white kids that lived in the neighborhood, because the West Side was not totally segregated back then. It was integrated in terms of poor and poor, whatever your color was, okay? So how should I say, when you come forward from the 50s and you come into the late 50s and 60s, there was not a monolithic experience in the school system. when you talk to some of the people that came up through Fairview and Dyer as an example, many people said they had a wonderful time at Fairview School. They thought it was a beautiful experience. There were a lot of different people that went to Fairview from different cultures, from different countries, and they got to engage them, and IU students were a presence at Fairview School because they were trying to get their degrees in education. So they were volunteering, to come work at Fairview. And the children that went to school there during those times, they enjoyed that because then they got exposed to things at the university. They were invited to come out and see a musical, performance or a play or, different things like that. So some of the people that you talk to would say it was all good until they got to junior high and high school. And I think some of that shift in the junior high and high school years had to do with the fact that now you're becoming young ladies and young men. And there was that whole undercurrent of knowing your place in Bloomington. As long as you fit into what the white majority, which at that point was probably 90% of the population, felt colored people should be like, you didn't have any conflict. But if you started to step away from that, then that's when the conflict hit. And for me personally, I went to Catholic school 1 through 8. To be candid, it was no less prejudiced than Monroe County schools, okay? When I was asked what was a pivotal point in my education, one of those was the fact that out on the playground, a young girl bullying me, called me the N-word, told me I needed to go back to Africa. And that was not what was so impactful, because I had been raised to expect people to act foolishly and say stupid stuff. And I had been raised how to react. What impacted me was that the other children had encircled me and they were just watching. There was no one taking my side. There was no one stepping forward to say, shut up, that's not right, that's Vivian. And that is what shook me and let me understand what racism and prejudice were really all about. It was the silence of the majority, not as much the words of the bully that really impacted me. But again, back on plan here, when we got to high school, many people started to, feel the prejudice, And it was subtle. It wasn't always overt. You go to put your class schedule together, and you're guided to all of those courses that guide you towards a certain path for your future. Not toward college, no college prep courses, but towards being a secretary, working, with your hands, doing this, doing that. And so the Black parents had to put an eye on that for their children. You bring that schedule home, baby, let mama look at that schedule. And mama would go over all of our schedules, and then she would write in what she knew we needed to take to be prepared to go to college. Then you take that back to the counselor, and she would look at you funny, but she didn't want Miss Elizabeth to come down and visit with her either. And those of you who knew my mother know what I'm talking about, okay? So this went on not just for me, but for a majority of us in high school. If they were playing sports, a lot of the guys, they might be bullied in the locker room, and sometimes by the coach or the assistant coach, or they'd be called out of their name. If any of their teammates stepped up in defense of them, then they weren't allowed to start in the next game. So teammates that stood up for what was right were penalized, and they learned quickly, stay silent. There was not just that with the sports, but even beyond that in the classroom. And this one, I wish I could say I was surprised, but not much surprises me anymore. One young woman who was playing basketball, she was in the room with the rest of her team and the coach. They were in there for a little session, pep talk session. And she was sitting by the blackboard that was in the room. And he told her, he called her name. He said, "Don't sit by that blackboard. You so black I can't see you." What's that? Obviously. And she's the only black person on the team. Everybody turns around, looks at her. But it's to, how should I say, demean and to put you in your place. I, having been raised the way I was raised, I had self-confidence and pride in self. Not just because I was born that way, but that's the way my mom and dad raised me. So often I would bump up against teachers that would say derogatory or demeaning things. And one time I had a person to tell me, called me in to sit down and told me, Vivian, it's obvious you think a little too much of yourself. It's like, really? So, like I said, Bloomington, in some aspects, moved forward quickly than other places in the country. But at the same time, that undertone was still there. That pressure for you to, quote unquote, stay in your place was still there. When I started wearing an afro, when I was a freshman in high school, I was ostracized. White kids that I had grown up with from first grade, it was like, oh, no, this is not, you're not conforming, So I have, a tendency to flash back on other quotes. And it reminds me of driving Miss Daisy when the driver says, "Ain't that much changed, Miss Daisy?" As I looked at some of the things that came out from our session with the NAACP earlier, and I looked at some of the things that were brought forward that needed work as it relates to the schools, it's like, yeah, I recognize that. I recognize a whole lot of that. So when they burnt down the black market, when they burnt down then the African American music house over on Atwater, that's when I was in high school. The Ku Klux Klan was trying to march in Bloomington, and they were going to let them march until several hundred people from the community went downtown, and the mayor said, "Oh, we don't want all that." Otherwise, they would have let them march. And when I say ain't that much changed, I moved back to Bloomington in 2020, full-time. And when I moved back here, that next summer, there was a young group of Klansmen, they had it in the newspaper. We're up on the square downtown. So there's still work to be done.
We'll go to Daewon next.
Hello, everyone. My experience is a little bit different, but I will say starting from elementary school, definitely I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. I said, being in school, I learned, definitely elementary, I had learned a lot about education was being serious. I was still able to read Black books. I was still able to be educated. I was raised in a single parent home, so my mom raised me with two other siblings while being a full-time college student. So she worked full-time and she was a full-time college student. So while raising us, she wanted us to have the best education. So education was everything for my mother. So I went to, but I still had to go to a public school. So she focused on which public schools had the best school ratings, so we can have the best education. So while in school, when I would say in fourth grade, I went to a charter school, but then I had to transfer to public. And when we went to lunch, the principal used to make us read books in the lunchroom. So I was just kind of looking around like, why am I reading a book during lunch? This is time to socialize. This is my time to be able to, just mingle and get to know people. And then I realized that we was able to speak after we got our lunch. We wasn't able to speak until, so I had a Black principal, and I think her goal was to show us that sometimes you have to be disciplined, you have to be structured to get what you want. And I never knew if that was the right way or the wrong way, but of course I followed it because I was a student. I was just a child. I realized that the system had then failed us when I went to middle school. So I did go to some prominent middle school, high schools in Indianapolis. I went to Shirt Ridge my 6th grade year of middle school, and they only allowed 23 students in 6th grade to go there because they only had one teacher, one classroom, but it was a school that they only allowed so many 6th graders in. So I was blessed to have the opportunity to advance to that. Then the system of IPS, which is Indianapolis Public Schools, they closed down the schools and made them just high schools itself. So it turned into an IB school, and so I had to find another school to go to. And none of them was like in the area where I was living in, so I ended up choosing to go to Crispus Attucks High School, which is a very, very known school. And they had a medical program, and I always knew that I wanted to be in the medical field. So when I got there, I was able to be accepted into their medical program, and I started taking classes that taught you more about health. But then that's when I realized, like as I said, that the system failed me, and I didn't have teachers. So I had only 2 teachers, and they separated us from, it used to be called Purdue and IU. And I realized that they separated us from our testing. So I realized that they tried to put the Purdue kids with, and they considered us as like the lower testing, and then they had the IU kids where they were higher testing kids. And I found it funny because the IU side, they had a social studies, they had their social studies, their science, and their math, and their English teacher. But the Purdue side only had English and math. So I was just like, when are we ever gonna find teachers? We're gonna have teachers. So my mother, she was constantly at the school going at it. I was very involved growing up as well. So I played basketball, I was in the band, and I was always a part of the Student Leader Council. So after my mom seen the lack of education and that the teachers were starting to disappear, she ended up pulling me from Crispus Attucks, and I went to a high school called Pike High School my freshman year of high school because my mom did not want me to lack education in high school. So while going back a little bit, while being at Attucks, I realized that like discrimination have not stopped. It still goes, it still happens. And like me in the mind I was still immature, so I really wasn't sure about a lot of things. But this is when the movie Straight Outta Compton had came out. And like police officers, they had a tendency to think that like a lot of the black kids and children in the neighborhood, parents wasn't paying attention to them, didn't give them as much focus as they needed. So one day, me, my brother, and some of his friends went to the mall, but my mom always went to the same places we were at. She gave us the freedom to like walk around the mall by ourselves, but she made sure she was in that mall. So we were leaving the mall to meet her at the car, and a police officer had stopped me. And he was like, he pulled me, he was like, oh, you think you're a black tall person and you think you just have the voice and authority to say what you want? And he didn't know that my mom was coming right behind me. So he had put me like in handcuffs. I was very afraid. I was crying. I was scared. And this was the day before Easter. And he was telling my mom, I would take your son downtown to process him because he said that I said F the police. Remind you, the movie Straight Outta Compton just came out. So I was just kind of looking at him like I was confused. And so he was going to lock me up because he said, until I admit that I said F the police, I was going to go to jail. And so me, like, I have never been a child to be like, I'm not going to say I said something or did something and I know I didn't do it. So we're just sitting there for hours because I'm still telling this man, like, I did not say F the police. So then he started talking about my mom, how she wasn't nothing, she wasn't going to be nothing until he seen her come out. So then, of course, they looked at her as an aggressive black woman because she came to protect her children. So that was something that kind of just shook me up, and it just made me immediately realize that, like, I want to be a voice. I want to be in leadership. I want to be someone who can make an impact for the black people in the community that I was in. So now I'm in Pike High School, which is kind of a bigger school. There were about 8,000 students in the high school. My class had over 1,000 students coming in. So I had to learn how to fit in. All these students pretty much went to middle school, elementary together. So like me, I come in like as an individual, and I'm trying to find a way to fit in. The basketball team was one of the hardest teams to like get on. So I ended up trying out. I made the team, but I also wanted to be a part of the Student Leader Council still. I still want to be involved. I still want to have a voice. I also joined the Black History Club. I remember that I used to have to run extra laps after practice because I decided that I didn't want to miss the Black Student, the Student Leader Council or the Black History Club, because I felt like it was important to learn about my history. And I realized that they started to limit the things that we were learning in history classes. It wasn't about Black lives. It wasn't about, and we didn't go beyond Dr. Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks. So I'm just like, who's these other people? They're not the only two people who made a huge impact. So I noticed the limitation that they started to give us. So throughout high school, I tried to make sure I stayed involved. Sorry, I had wrote down some important things I want to talk about. Yes, so while I was in high school, I remember COVID ended up coming. So when COVID came, it was very, very like hard because students didn't have resources. Students lacked just a lot of things. And I remember my brother, we're a year apart, and he was a senior. And I remember so many seniors like asking me like, hey, can you help me with math? Can you help me with math? Can you help me with math? Because I was always one of them students who used to stay after class. Because if I didn't understand something, you got to help me understand, because I just always wanted to be successful. And I always wanted to show people that even though I had a single parent in the household, that doesn't determine or make me any less as someone who has two parents in the household. So I graduated with honors, technical honors as well. I was able to get my EMT certification. So I am a licensed EMT here in Indiana. So I just always had the biggest thing I wanted to just take away from this is that our teachers had went on strike. So students is like lacking education. We're missing out on education that other students are going to school. But Pike High School, and there was a few other townships who teachers went on strike. So we're coming to school, the bus drivers went on strike. So we don't have nobody to educate us because they wasn't funding the teachers enough money or paying them enough. So then that also pushed me to want to go to a HBCU. So when I realized that I wanted to go to a predominantly Black university, I'm just like, okay, like how I'm going to do this. But I was so stuck on my mom, so I ended up settling coming here to Indiana University last minute. I ended up getting accepted to Morehouse down in Atlanta, and I went to go visit, and I was like, okay, I think this is where I'm going to go, this is where I'm going to be at. And then I realized how far it was from my mom. And then I also realized of like how the living was at a HBCU. And it wasn't that it was anything wrong, but I know how my mom raised us to make sure we had the best as possible. So I was like, okay, well, I think I'm just gonna settle at IU. And then I had a basketball coach. His name is Duke. He was very, very a great mentor in my life. And he used to always tell me like, would you want an HBCU diploma or a predominantly white diploma? And I never realized what he said, but he was getting to the point of like your job opportunities and how like we live in a white world. So what he was getting at was saying he would believe that my white diploma would get me a better job over my Black diploma. And I was always confused by that growing up. So then I was just trying to figure out where he was getting at, So I got here at Indiana University. And I have a few friends who's at HBCUs. And just being along, being a part of NAACP and having the chance to grow and learn more and more history. I would love to shout out Chase Isagoe. I was able to meet him while being here, and he had started an organization called Future Black Leaders Incorporated. And he started it because he realized that he went to Fishers, which was even more of a predominantly white in high school, and he realized that being at that high school, that blackface was still happening. People was making themselves look Black and like teasing and taunting them. And then he finally realized that like we're not being educated. So what this organization does is to educate students because he realized that they were taking that Black education away out of the school system. So what he's doing now, I was able to have an opportunity and be one of the foundees for my high school, so we can continue to keep that education in these school systems, even though they're trying to take them away from us. For our Black leaders who have left a huge impact. And lastly, like I just feel like being a Black student, or just being Black in general, I'm always portrayed as aggressive because of my height and how tall I am and my size, and definitely I'm a Black man. I just feel like I'm either underrepresented, or if I'm not that, I'm always looked at as, like I said, aggressive because I'm Black. And I hate that, like when I turn on a stern voice or when I turn on my serious voice, now I'm being attacked, or I'm attacking someone, or I'm being aggressive. But it's never portrayed on like, how did you just approach me? How did you just come up to me? I'm not attacking you. I'm just defending myself. So that's a little bit about my journey. I'm excited to be here at Indiana University. I feel like I have been a part of a lot of ups and downs. I always would love to thank Dr. Glow. She has been a big inspiration throughout my journey. Kendall Scales, which is the vice president of NAACP, she's always been at the Indiana University Bloomington chapter. She's been a great push and support. Imani and Michaela as well. They also serve on the leadership committee, and I just feel like as long as we keep pushing and we keep making sure we stay educated and making sure that we have the resources, no matter what, we gonna make it. Change is gonna continue to be made.
Amen.
Hi everyone. So first I just want to start off by saying that these are like amazing experiences. I'm glad you guys are able to share that with us. One thing I did want to touch bases on, especially with Ms. Vivian, is the undertones of what is still happening today. I think that because it's not as mainstream and it's not as like adherent or in your face, people think racism doesn't exist, but it very much does exist. And I would say especially here in Indiana. So I'm going to share a little bit of my experience. I do have a similar experience to you. I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, single parent household. It was me, my sister, and my brother. My first school was in Lawrence Township, which is a predominantly white area. And at that moment, I didn't realize the racism that was going on because I was in kindergarten. But I think my mother did, and so that's why we moved to Pike Township. So majority of my life, I grew up in Georgetown, 56 in Georgetown. My mom always liked to say that we were sheltered in the hood, because we really were. But now thinking about it, our plaza was like Burger King, African braiding store, and like the liquor store on every corner. So now I know like what my environment was. But my mom always tried to make it the best for us and always tried to let us know that we were smart, that we did have potential to make it out and do great things. So the first thing my mom taught me was to read and write. So I started learning to read and write when I was 2 years old. I was a very advanced reader. And the first experience that I would say that I could remember of like the racism and kind of sort of microaggression that I experienced was in my first grade. There was a girl who wasn't like me. I was Black. I was the only Black person in that class. And she was a very advanced reader as well. She's in first grade. She's reading like a 5th grade level at that time. And I remember her reading a chapter book, and I was like, I love those books. So I went over to grab a book, and my teacher told me, you can't read that. And I said, well, okay, I'll just give her the book back. I didn't understand the severity of that commentary at that moment, but I went and told my mom what the teacher had said, and my mom was like, we going up to the school. So the next day, she went up to the school, and she talked to the principal, and after my mom left, I guess they sort of wanted me to prove that I could read the chapter book. So I had to go through like a series of tests just to read like maybe a 5th grade level chapter book. And at that time, I could read 8th grade level in the 1st grade. So I did end up reading the chapter books, but it was kind of just like a moment that solidified that racism still exists. So after moving into a predominantly Black and Hispanic area, I would say that it wasn't really talked about racism wasn't really talked about. Like he said, we had multiple history lessons of Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, maybe Abraham Lincoln, because he freed the slaves. But we can get more. We can get more into that later. But yes, I did have. I wasn't aware of kind of the historical impact because I was always surrounded by people that looked like me. So fast forwarding, moving to Bloomington, Indiana, I moved here like 2 months before my 8th grade year was going to end. And I would say the amount of racism that I experienced here was something that I would never want like my kids to go through or any other kids to go through. And I remember during this time the Black Lives Matter protest was happening, George Floyd, and I decided that I wasn't going to stand for the pledge because I thought in my head, like, this pledge is talking about liberty and justice, but every day we're seeing the opposite. So that was just something personal that I didn't want to stand for. And I remember the kid behind me was like, "You're not standing for the pledge? You need to stand for the pledge." And it kind of caused a huge uproar in my class. And so throughout then, it was me and my friend Sydney, which is Jennifer Cassidy's mom. We didn't stand for the pledge after that, and that made them even more upset. But we heard racist things all the time, being called the N-word behind our backs, all because we didn't do something that the majority wanted to do, and that kind of made and solidified the reason to why I was so passionate about things like racial justice and equity. So fast forwarding to my 9th grade year, I was in the library just reading a book, staying for after school tutoring, because as well, I'm horrible at math. So if I don't understand it, I'm gonna stay till I understand it so I can get this A and get up out this class. So I was in tutoring in the library, and at the side of my peripheral view, I see a boy the same grade as me on the floor reenacting the George Floyd horrible, horrific event that happened in the library. This guy is screaming, nothing is happening, like nothing. The teachers aren't saying anything, nobody's saying anything. And in that moment, I'm just looking, I'm like, why is this allowed in the library? So at this point, I'm like, should I say something? Should I not say something? And guys, I'm just gonna be completely honest, I didn't say anything. And that's something that is like what represents why I'm so passionate about it now, to be able to be a voice for the voiceless, for people who feel like they can't speak up. Because in that moment, moving from an area where everybody looked like me, we all shared kind of the same beliefs and background, to somewhere where everyone was just so against kind of our belief that I grew up in, it was really scary at first. And so I didn't say anything, but I reported it to like my teacher, and nothing happened. And then there was multiple instances where teachers were saying the N-word in class. People were going to like the January 9th incident that happened for the rally down in the Capitol. And it was just something that I knew that I couldn't just sit back and just let this continue to happen, because obviously my sister, she's younger than me, so are like my cousins, they all live in Bloomington. I don't want them to have to experience it and feel like they can't say anything in that moment. So I decided that this is going to be my moment where I'm going to speak up. And so I thought, what can I do to not solve this issue, but bring light and shed light to this issue that racism still does exist. It might exist in like an undertone, but it still does exist. And so I gathered with a few of my friends from Black Culture Club, Sydney, Stefan, and Sabra, and we decided to go up to the MCCSC school board to speak about the racism that was happening. And we said that we needed an anti-racism policy in our school district that would protect and that would be a safe haven policy for the people of color that were being tarnished and hurt from the actions that were happening at MCCSC. And so after that, that also caused an uproar because I don't feel like anyone's gonna be like, no, we don't want this to happen, but we kind of got that underlying undertone and idea that people didn't want it to happen. So we started seeing more racism. We started seeing more things that were happening in our school day-to-day basis, Nazi flags, Confederate flags, all these things that should not be represented in our school, especially in 2022 at that point. So we were like, we need this to happen. So we went every single month until we could come up with an anti-racism policy and for it to be enacted in our district. And at first it was just for our high school, but it became a district-wide thing. So now it's no longer that it's just for high school students, but it's also for people K through 12, that they know that they are protected through this policy, that they have resources here, people who are fighting for them that know that something's going wrong and how to kind of act from that. And I just can't wait for it to grow and for more people to be the voice for people who can't speak. And so now that I'm older and realize the things that I didn't realize when I was younger, I just look up to my older self now and I'm like, the childhood in me is just like so proud of how far I've come, because I used to not be so outspoken. I used to be very timid, but yeah, that's pretty much my story. And I can't wait to just see more and just to encourage younger people that we do have a voice. And I think it's more impactful when we have younger individuals that realize what's going on in our community.
All right.
Give our panelists. Thank you. Thank you. I had some questions, but a lot of you answered all of them. So we're gonna switch gears a little bit, and I'm gonna open it up to the audience to see if you have any initial thoughts or questions after hearing the panelists, and we'll call on you. Charlie?
So I'm Charlie Nelms, and I attended a Rosenwald school. Julius Rosenwald was president and chief executive officer of Sears Roebuck and Company, based in Chicago. And before the days of the public school system for Black people, especially in the South, Julius Rosenwald established the Rosenwald Fund. The Rosenwald Fund built over 5,300 colored schools throughout the southern United States. I attended one of those schools until I was 4th grade. I never had a new textbook growing up in the Arkansas Delta. Everything from my school, at my school, had been used by white kids except the chalk. So Frank, when you talk about how things were during Jim Crow, I lived that. So the colored only water fountains, the restrooms, the waiting bus stations and all of that, I experienced that. I don't want to go back there, but here's what I want to say. I think that when we as a group of Black people and Americans in general embraced integration, and by the way, we've never achieved integration, not even now. We have a desegregated system, but we do not have an integrated system. But more about that another time. But when we embraced integration as we did, I think we lost an enormous amount. And we have yet to recover from that. So what did we lose? We lost black principals, black teachers, black schools, we lost all of that infrastructure, black businesses. All of that got lost in pursuit of integrating with a group of people who had no interest in having us be a part of it. Okay? And so, yes, we got a few new buildings. Okay? But when you really look at it, we did not gain nearly as much as a lot of people would like to think that we have gained. Don't want to go back to Jim Crow era, don't ever want to go back there. But I don't think it's a matter of Jim Crow and nothing else. There's a lot in between. Okay, and I think that that's what we have to be willing to speak up and take a stand for. As we get into this anti-DEI thing, for people to sit silently by and not say anything is dangerous. And with that, I'm going to stop because there are a lot of parallels between what's happening now and what was happening then.
Amen.
And Martin Luther King said it this way. We will, in the end, we will not forget the silence of our enemies. Is that right? Something different. The words of our enemy, but the silence of our friends or something. So be careful being silent. Man, I came to Indiana University because I couldn't go to school, graduate school in Arkansas, 54 years ago.
I want to say something. Brown, when we say brown, we mean different things. We say the word, we mean different things. I think most of us think of brown as the right decision poorly implemented, because after they decided that they would integrate, they didn't say it once. They said it with all deliberate speed. So it took forever, and the South learned how to drag its feet, and it reinforced the resistance. And there's some say it's still resistant. So if it's not Brown, the decision, and Brown, one would look at this as it was a battle. We fought a battle, we won that battle, but we didn't win the war. And you got part of the question is, what is the war? I mean, the war, as Charlie says, it's not integration. The war was, I think, it was either equality. That's what we really want, is equality, to be treated equal and fairly. Well, the war is against racism, which is what I think DEI is. And that's why it's so controversial, because we have a problem with racism. What the Brown said is this will hurt the hearts and minds of young people. But you have to change the hearts and minds of white people. And that's been a challenge, because what we have now is you can integrate the schools, but you have white flight. So now you're integrating all black schools. How do you integrate an all black school? And that's what we have now. That's what we're dealing with. All black schools and all white schools in suburbia. As Charlie alluded to, there's more, I mean, we're more segregated than we were almost in 1954 in that regard. So this DEI battle is one where it's really important, because we're trying to get at racism. I think of Brown in some senses like being, and Bloomington has very reasonable restaurants. I lived in New York City. They have unreasonable restaurants. There are restaurants that are very expensive. And Brown said, okay, there's no restaurant that can keep you out because of the color. But you know something? If you don't have any money, you can't go to that restaurant. And it's sort of like, now we can go to any school that we can, if we live in the district. And the geographical segregation in this country, we have to crack that. And that's impossible to crack right now. The only way to crack it is you have enough money to live in that, to move to Beverly Hills. And there's so few of us in that regard. But as long as they keep this geographical neighborhood schools notion, you're not going to have integration, or not as we see it. Part of me wonders whether Thurgood Marshall and all the folks looking back in hindsight and said, maybe we took the wrong track. Maybe we should have dealt with separate but equal, get the same resources. And I'm not certain, I mean, we haven't achieved integration. And we're dealing with segregation, trying to make the black schools we have now better. That's what that's what Plessy would have had us do, is make the black institutions the same. So I'm not certain. And I think back to King. I mean, his last fights were not in the court. He had enough lawyers to do that. His fight was against poverty. And, you know, I don't know who's picked that up yet. I guess the Reverend from North Carolina is about the only one picking that up. But that's the challenge, is the financial. And you know, the war against poverty is no one's fighting that right now, I think.
Comes to segregation, a lot of people often look back to the 1950s and beforehand, but to just kind of piggyback off of your point, it definitely does still exist today. It might exist in various of ways, but it definitely still does exist, especially in our education system. We see a lot economically, where Black and Hispanic and Indigenous individuals are placed in environments and neighborhoods where they're not able to get enough resources. And even in the classes as well, I take AP honors classes. I don't see a lot of individuals who look like me or even people of color in those classrooms. And I think that when it comes to DEI, we need to find a way to incorporate people of color in the educational system that are getting the resources that they need. Because even in middle schools, I'm not sure if it's here the same in Bloomington, but in Indianapolis, we are separated. I like to say that we're segregated, but we are separated based on our test scores. So you get picked based on your test scores if you're in honors classes or AP classes or just regular classes. And so they have separate hallways, separate lunchrooms, depending on what you test to. And I remember as a little girl feeling so just kind of alone and also not feeling as smart as my counterparts because of my test scores. I'm not the best test taker, but I am very advanced for my education. And so DEI is kind of, we still need to work towards finding ways for people of color and students to have those opportunities and programs that foster to educational success.
Thank you, Danielle. And we know that testing, right, standardized testing, is just another tool of systemic racism, right? So thank you for naming that, which is such a big issue in schools. I want to get other questions from the audience. I saw Jennifer's hand.
Good afternoon, I'm Jennifer Crossley, and I just want to thank y'all for sharing your experiences. I have birthed 3 amazing children. One who works specifically with JL. She was also one of the young ladies who continued to go to MCCSC, and I don't know if you all really know what you've done, but that was major. I don't think that any of me, I don't know if anybody else at your age could go to a bunch of adults and say, this is not okay, and I'm gonna keep pressing and pressing and pressing until you tell us what we want to hear. Because in the beginning, we were getting sugar-coated a lot of different things, and people were not giving us the answers. And I remember you, Sabra, and Sydney as well were very frustrated with a lot of things, so much so we had a lot of attitude at home, and we were trying to rope that back in. But you all are seniors. The other 2 young ladies are now going off to college, and now you and Sydney are seniors, and you're about to graduate. And I know this has been a concern of mine, and I know it's a concern of Sydney's, but it's specifically for you. How do you keep the legacy of what you all worked very hard for and to MCCSC, and to continue to make sure that
they continue to do what you all were very courageous to do and implement in the schools.
Thank you so much for that question. I've had the same thoughts as well, just because I know I'm probably not going to be here after I graduate high school. I'm probably going to be out of state. And to answer that, we still do have Black Culture Club. So right now we are working on finding younger students to kind of bring on that legacy to help us implement strategies as well as improving the policy for MCCSC school district. So right now, even with Black Culture Club, me and Cindy work in Black Culture Club too, we're all seniors on leadership. We are all seniors, and so just even finding students who are passionate about racism or any type of service in the community and want to be active into that, we are mentoring them and molding them so they can kind of build up that legacy and do better than us, hopefully. And the same thing that we're getting started soon is the NAACP Youth Council. So my sponsor in the back, Mariah Douglas. She has been a great mentor to helping me find students from 6th grade to high school to college to also be active and continue on that legacy as well. So we are working hard to get that going, and also when we leave, have students working in the community as well.
Thank you, JL. And they are still recruiting for the youth council, right?
Yes, we
So
are still recruiting, so if you know anybody, hit
you
me
can
up
talk
at
to
the end.
JL and Maria, and they can
Right.
connect you to the right people. We're gonna take one more question, and then I'm gonna ask Maria to come up, and then we'll have a little bit more conversation. Any other questions or comments?
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes.
And that is that in doing some research, I discovered that there's only about 6% of the teachers in America are Black. I was dumbfounded. I just, 6% is a, why is that? I mean, why are only 6% of the teachers in America Black? How you expect, well,
I was gonna say,
You want to respond to that?
yes. Education doesn't stop just education doesn't start just in the school. Education should also start at home and outside of school. And things that I've seen lately, definitely in the Black community, is that and this doesn't go for all Black parents, but a lot of Black parents get on schools and harm schools, but it's not just at school. That's just one part of education. The rest of the education needs to happen at home, and I've seen it lack in so many ways. And people are not being taught the common things that we need to know in life, as the simple things of cook and clean and having mannerisms and respect. That doesn't always happen in school. That should always happen at home. Another thing is with the 6% of teachers that's being taught at these schools or only schools in America is that we need more as Black people. And I'm not saying that you're not supposed to do things because you love them, but we have families to feed. We have homes to raise or children to raise to be successful. And me being paid this little bit of money and I'm have to deal with several kids who's coming from different backgrounds and so many things, it's not the easiest route to always take. And you know you have better opportunities out there. And it's sad to say, but I do want to say that parents and us in general, we need to start taking initiative of making sure that we're educating them outside of school, because we know that the school system is not teaching them everything that they need. And going back to what the question you had asked too, as well as making sure that you document everything as a student and everything that y'all are doing and everything that you are achieving, because that's what is going to set you up for success. Regardless that you come back or don't come back, as long as it's documented, it's there. And I think that's something that we need to make sure that we start doing is documenting things so they know that this is what history was made, and it wasn't made so far long ago. It was just made yesterday. So making sure those things are being brought to light.
I understand that what you said at home, but I know MCCSC, if we take a look at what they're doing with the Childs, the Templeton, and all this, to think that's gonna give those kids that were down here what they want. I mean, I was riding through the city one day and I saw that playground. How come that playground had to just now exist? And then if you look at MCC again, all our black kids that graduate and have degrees, they don't recycle them. They recycle all of their white teachers. You look at this MCC school board, they grew up here, they become principals, then they become administrators, and then if they go away to school, they come back and they automatically get in. We've had black kids come from black schools to come here and apply for jobs and not get anything. So it's not like we don't want to be teachers, but we're not received. And what this sister is doing is good, but we need to support her and trickle her down. We can't wait to go and, how do you say it? Tell Pharaoh said, we gotta go to them. We got kids in Crestmont that need to hear this word. We heard a sermon this morning, didn't we, Miss Ebony? Vivian. And it's so true. If we don't hear what we need to hear to survive, we won't get there. It's not enough for all of us to get educated, but we gotta get informed. And we're not, because we have kids that's going to the classroom that are, how do you say it? They think they're gay or whatever, and they actually have teachers say deal with it. When the kids are, this is right now. We have black administrators too that are just not in tune to what's going on with our children. So, hey.
Thank you. And speaking of, that was a very powerful point that I think is a good segue. And for the sake of time, we're going to continue the conversation. But in terms of continuing and supporting students like J. Gale and supporting students like Daywan and the things that they're doing, whether it be in MCCSC or even in the community. And we know for Black folks in particular, the community is so critical, right? We've heard talk about parents, we've heard talk about the church, right? We've heard talk about community centers like Banneker, and then there's also allyship, right? So we've heard examples of people just watching things happen, right? Or instances where we wanted maybe folks who were a part of the majority or who didn't look like us to say something. And we've heard silence speaks. That was my way of kind of summarizing the different things that stood out to me. But we're not gonna let silence speak. That's why we're here today. We're gonna talk about some actionable things that can happen right here in our community. And the kind of foundational thought that undergirded this conversation today and this event today is that we all have a role. It's not just the school board. It's not just teachers. It's not just principals. It's not just administrators in the school. We as community have things that we can do as well. And so Maria is going to help us go into that conversation.
And Amani Chambers, please report to the stage to help me. Or not. Or no, other Amani, not Amani Chambers. Amani Llewellyn. Sorry, too many Amanis, never enough Amanis, never enough. So I'm Maria Douglas. I serve on the NAACP's Education Subcommittee as well. And so again, thank you so much, panelists. And we do want to talk about, that was a great, thank you for sharing that. We need to talk, have more conversations like that. And so that's what we want to have now, is that we were going to break out into small groups, but we just don't have the time or the capacity right now because we want to have a really good, robust discussion. And so let's bring it to Monroe County. Let's think about what we can commit to do here. I know a lot of us in this audience, we go to a lot of community conversations. There's a lot of talking, and I think some of us are ready for action. So we need to be the example, right? Because I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir. We know, we understand that we need to not be silent, but what are some specific things that we can do? For example, So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to think. But for example, if this is something that you don't feel you have a good understanding of, who can you have a conversation with? Or who can I feel like our youth, as we've been talking about, need our support now more than ever. And I want to say yes about the parent situation, and parents are just trying to survive these days. And parents are just trying to put food on the table and pay the bills. So maybe what can we do to walk alongside or support the parents who are working second shifts, who can't go to the school board meeting, who works third shift and barely sees their child as it is? So let's really think of some realistic, real world things that you and I, as people in this community, can commit to doing, and hopefully setting the example and leading the way for people to not stay silent and for people to be action oriented. So I'll give you a couple minutes. Oh, Jim's ready to go. I'll give you, should have known. No, just kidding. Well, I'll give you a couple minutes to think while Jim talks, and we're going to take these notes over here. And what we're doing is, again, we want this to be a call to action, to specific action. And we ask for your email addresses so we can follow up and remind everybody what they committed to. And that maybe you can look around in this room and we can hold each other accountable. How about it? It's okay to do that. In fact, it's loving and kind to do that. So let's think a little bit. Jim, you want to say a couple things? Yeah.
Very quickly. And thank you all. I think a couple points I want to make. First of all, it's important that we, as a community, build allies and partnerships with folks that can affect change. And I will take a little pause here and introduce to you all State Representative Mark Pierce. Matt Pierce, I'm sorry, thank you, Mark. Matt Pierce, County Council person Jennifer Crossley, and City Council member Isabel Piedmont Smith. Now, did I miss anyone?
School board member Aaron.
School board, thank you, thank you. They've thought enough to be here, to listen to what we have to say, and they in turn have people that they talk with in our lives, and that's how you kind of build a broader coalition that will affect change. But to touch on Frank's point, I've done a little research as well too, with Ruth's help and some of the information. Black and brown kids and kids of color tend to have better educational outcomes when they have educators more in numbers that look like them and teach like them. So that's one of the things we've always advocated is we need more teachers of color. We need black teachers that are people of color. Before us, we have an interim superintendent that is working her butt off to help affect change, was part of this anti-harassment policies. I mean, it was part of that. One of the things we as a community can do that can affect change is you get in touch with your school board members. You get in touch with those that have an effect, and if you agree, you say, we want Superintendent Mark A. Winstead. The school board is going to have to make that decision, but if the community stands up and says, this is what we want, you might be impressed with some of the change. That can also turn into getting more educators and teachers of colors. We've talked about this for years. We have a school of education right up the road that are graduating teachers, black teachers, but they don't come here. I don't know why. Do we not hire them? Is there enough resources? That's one of the things I think can affect the academic change for our children, and not only just black and brown and children of color, for all children. And I think that's what's important and not to be forgotten in this conversation. So if you all wanted to address that and what you thought about that, it'd be fine. But I just really wanted to get that out, and I know we're pressed for time.
You're good.
Hey, Mr. Sims.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you reiterate the fact that the interim
interim.
Yeah, interim.
Yes.
So what she's doing, that the school board member here today can take that back to her table.
I'm hoping that she will if she
Yes.
agrees. So,
Well-
we're not forcing, but no, I think she will.
But if she says, I attended this process,
Yes,
and this is what I heard. This is what the
Yes.
little people are looking for.
I thank you, and
I
I
don't
will.
know how to put it right there.
No, I think
I'll
you're
sit-
right, and I
yeah,
will
I'll
say
sit
this,
there. Yeah,
during school board elections.
yeah, right,
There's many that have been endorsed by the NAACP.
right, that's right.
And we do that because we work with people. They think and try to reach the outcomes that we think is important. So it's not only just Erin, and that's good, I'm glad she's here. But, I mean, April and people like that, those are who we'll all talk to.
Do we have
I
any
agree
black
with you.
candidates for the school board this term?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
We should identify them now if we do.
Tiana, Irujo,
Iroje.
last name?
Yeah,
Okay.
Tiana Iroje.
There's a dash in there, and I used to work with, so I should know better. But yes, she's running unopposed, so she will be elected.
Okay.
And I think most candidates are run unopposed. So now's the time to really talk and share, this is what we as community want to see in our school system. Okay, and remember, you don't have to have kids in school system. You were in school, you've had kids in school, you're gonna have more in school. You know what the school should reflect, the community we want. So those are the type of topics that we should have when we have those discussions. And again, thank you all for being here. And if you're not elected, you are an ally and an advocate and sharing. That's one reason why you're here. So thank you all for being here.
I just want to
So-
add briefly, we did invite other school board members, and there are several of the ones who said they couldn't make it. So
Right.
I'm glad that we have the CATS recording, and also some folks from the administration. So hopefully it will not all just fall to Erin, but we appreciate that she could be present.
And so, what are some specific things that we could do to support the interim superintendent? Let's think about that. And maybe those are some things that we want to write down or that we want to commit to. Even having a conversation. We need to have building a relationship, having conversations with people are, I think we don't, I'm not getting my words clearly, but that we don't put enough weight behind just having that conversation, say, hey, what can I do to support you? Or how can I help? Or you're doing a great job.
I agree. I think having the conversation or inviting her to have a conversation with a interested group would be wonderful. And expressing what it is, once we pull that together, that we would like to see from the school board or in the school system, and then saying, how can I help? I think that's a great idea.
Something I would also recommend is I think it's powerful when students speak at school board meetings, but I also think it's even more powerful when we have parents, when we have adults coming together with the students to show their support. So along with emailing school board members, also being there, showing up to those meetings, because anti-racism policy is still a thing that we're working on right now. Policy, guidelines, we need to implement those. So having parents, adults here to support and also speaking up is something that can give support to those students and to us.
Absolutely.
Guy?
One of the initiatives that NCC has been working on is the combining the Templeton and Childs schools. To me, this seems like a pretty good concrete step that would get economic and perhaps more racial equity among those schools. There seems to be a lot of resistance. And I guess my question is, how do I know, because I don't know yet, whether I want to go to the school board and say, this is a great idea, you should do it. I'm prone to think it is, but do we have an answer? Does the NAACP have an answer to this question? Is there a position the NAACP advocates? If it does, if the NAACP takes a position, says, we think this should be done, and we encourage people to go talk to the school board, that's a concrete step. And Ruth? Let me put my dear friend Ruth.
Our president has stepped out at a.
Yeah, I honestly-
I don't think we have a position.
Yeah, and
It's
think,
up to the position we have taken is, it's important to hear from the parents, from the families, to make sure that those who aren't the ones who have work schedules or inclinations to be able to go to school board meetings, to listen to, and I do hope that a lot of the community outreach that has been going on within the last 6 months or so is starting to do that. But yeah, I don't know if any others have thoughts.
yeah, and so, I know that that's a big concern, for sure, and that's probably something that we can talk about in a general body meeting situation. What I would like to focus on within that concern is having voices heard. I'm pointing at Miss Vivian, because at Founders Day, one of the main pieces of data that we collected during Founders Day was having people having their voice heard. And again, I'm talking real world, I'm talking granular. What if I work second shift? What if I work third shift? How am I going to communicate with who I need to communicate? How am I going to be involved? So these are some of the granular things that we want to think about and come out of here with some commitments to do.
I think Ms. Vivian had
Yeah.
a comment maybe.
Well, actually, I was thinking in the context of the merger of the two schools, and I'm not clear on where does the opposition come from? Sometimes the root of the opposition helps me understand whether I'm for it or against it. And is the root of the opposition one that, how do I say, promotes and moves forward inclusion and equity? Or is the root of the opposition something that is old school? And I don't know that answer. But that answer would help me know whether I'm a proponent or an opponent.
What I was saying is, someone else was in my ear. In order for the kids at Templeton to get what the other kids get, why do we have to do this? Why don't we just give them what they need? That's all I'm saying. But I guess that's the only way we can get them, is to do that.
I was just gonna say, I'm a parent of a fifth grader at Templeton. All three of my children have come through Templeton. And the Templeton Child's merger has, ever since, and Eric can probably attest to this too, has been a very controversial topic. Because we look at the social economic status of what Templeton looks like. And usually it is lower income students and also students of color. Child's, on the other hand, is on the east side. It comes from those students that go there are usually very well off, I'll say that. I will say that the school board and the administration has done a really good job right now of trying to have the community conversations between Childs and Templeton together. And I think the PTOs also have tried to merge together. There is a desire from one particular school to want to continue to have that. And I will say, from judging some of the forums that I've seen on social media, there's also a lot of resistance. Our school has had resistance to a playground that has been so well deserved. Yeah. And I don't know how many times I've had to rebuttal and advocate for Templeton to have it's a beautiful thing. It's a thing that the community can also use as well. But the community conversations that we've seen is, why do they have this? Why do they have that? Who told them to get this? How much money? I'm glad they have it, and I will continue to go nana boo-boo in anybody's face that will continue to say anything bad about Templeton, because I'm a long bear
of that particular school and the students and the teachers because they are so well deserved. That being said, you are asking what are action items. I think we also live in a community where we think that people know well because we posted on Facebook, we posted at this group that this is something that is happening. And look at the attendance. Also, I'm just gonna be honest, look at the faces of the attendants. Look at the people of color that are in this particular audience right now. We don't have the audience that we should really be having. But that being said, we also have this weird conception that, oh, people know who we are. It's the savior complex of, they'll just come to us, and let's be real, they won't. They don't know. We have to go to people where they are. And I think myself, as an elected, as a mom, and the other electeds here, we have to also start talking to our colleagues and saying, where are you in this? It's not good enough in an election season that we don't see people that are running for office that are here, that because they serve districts that feed into these particular schools. So again, as the action item for myself, I will hold my colleagues' feet to the fire, and I continue to do so publicly and privately. And they know that. And the other thing is, I would like to see maybe the NAACP and the educational subcommittee, if you have the bandwidth, to take this as a traveling town hall discussion. This would be a really good idea where you could talk to the PTOs of maybe Childs, of maybe Templeton, some of those underserved communities. And I know personally that Templeton would be all for having these community conversations because they already have that captivating audience. So how do you blend the message of what NAACP is trying to do plus the audience that they already have and put that together? And I think taking this on the road and going to people where they are, we already heard somebody say that we should go to people at Crestmont, those particular places. We have the means and the way to go about doing it. We know it needs to be done. We just gotta do it. And so I think, as I say that as a busy woman, I will do as much as I can as in my capacity. I also tap on my honeydew back there too. To see what we can do as well. But again, I think action item is seeing how we can take this message on a road. And really driving it into communities and saying, this is what's happening, this is what's going on.
Thank you for that. I just had a couple points I wanted to say about that. The first is, do y'all want to join the education subcommittee? Help us with that, help us build capacity, that would be helpful. My second point is like specifically about the merger. The thing is, if Black and brown students in MCCSC are being discriminated against and facing racism, merging the school is not going to help that. It's still going to continue. And not merging the school it's the same things are going to happen if they're happening. It doesn't matter the location, the school the students are in. So I think the merger is something to focus on. Obviously, it's something that's happening right now. But we can also think about some of the discrimination that's happening to students and staff at MCCSC, and what can we do to address that? As someone who is an employee of MCCSC, and I'm not a teacher, but I would be considered like a paraprofessional, we don't go through the same training that the teachers go through. We don't go through any anti-racism training. We don't go through any training of how to work with diverse students, neurodivergent students, students that may come from a different background. We don't go through that kind of training, and that's something that we could advocate for. I know personally with some of my coworkers, I've had to be the one to call them out and go and talk to the principal about them being unfair with their treatment towards specifically Black students and Black male students. And also, when I was looking at some of the data, we see an unfair treatment when it comes to Black students of disciplinary actions. Black students have higher rates of disciplinary action, and it's elevated quicker than their white counterparts. These are the type of things that we should be pushing to school board members and asking to, one, keep getting data, because the most recent data I could find for that was, I think, 2021. And so why is that data not accessible to people to be able to bring those points up? And also, what policies can we put in place to make sure that all the staff and teachers at MCCSC are being trained the same way, and making sure that we're keeping our staff and our students safe? And I think that should be something, like, if we don't get that groundwork in place, it doesn't matter what schools we merge, what we do to supposedly help with inequality if we're not getting that groundwork done first.
And I just want to make some points off of that too. I heard something about the schools being merged, and I hear we keep talking about the school boards, and I think it's very important to make sure that we do keep going to the boards and keep being consistent for these students' educations and the needs that they do have and they do need. But I think it's the time goes by. Time does not wait on us. And I feel like we can sit here and continue to complain. We can sit here and continue to have our concerns. But if we don't get educated and if we don't start putting into action before it's too late to save these children and these people in these schools, it's too late. So it's more of what are we going to do as individuals? And I want to kind of bring us back into that point as us here right now. What can we do to start helping? I'm a college student who's full-time, who's active, a part of multiple organizations, and I know that I'm a Black student at Indiana University, but I also make sure I joined onto the student government to make sure that the Black student and the Black community had the resources that all these other organizations are getting, because it's not fair that we're getting. And now that as a Black student who's having to try to sit here for the NAACP of IUB and the students in the community, fighting for us to get funding and everything else, because the school just took away so much money from us, and we can't get that money anymore. But at the same time, I'm willing to take my time as a senior who's finna graduate in May, who is willing to give his time to get back to these students. And it doesn't matter if it's only 2, 5, or 6 students, but it takes for us as a community to come together. My mom used to always say it takes a village to raise one child, And that doesn't mean we all have to give something in for these students to even become leaders and to be able to teach. But I feel like it starts with education with us, and us, instead of, I don't want to say we're complaining, because it's very important on what we're saying, but we do have to start putting into actions. So that's even if it's for us to have small discussions with these children and figure out where they're lacking at. I don't mind taking 2-3 hours out of my week, if not more, teaching them how to do math, teaching them how to read. It's the little things that they're lacking because we're not putting those actions into.
So just briefly, if anybody has thoughts they want to write down, let me know, and I'll pass you some index cards. And we are planning to share out the ideas that we have. So, index cards, that looks like you have a comment.
Kendall.
Yeah, I just don't know what they want to say. Hi, everyone. I'm Vice President. We have Black and brown students that don't even know how to read, write, and I get that we are, holding our, teachers accountable. We have to hold parents accountable, like we said before too. Me before, I almost was held back in the 3rd grade. And my mom took so much time out of her day, even when she was working so much, my dad was working so much, she still put that extra time into me, poured into me. And even if she didn't, she found those resources for people that could do that. So me as a college student, I would be more than happy to sit down with the kids, help them learn how to read. I graduated high school with an associate's degree. Like, it is possible. It is very much possible. We have so many students that will be happy to give back as long as you give them community service hours. You know what I'm saying? It can be a give and take relationship. So we can give to our community, but we can also gain so much more. But there's so many children that need help, and we can be that asset. Especially, there's people like me, there's people like Daywan, there's people like Imani that have been so involved in the Bloomington community. And even when I go back home, I go back and talk to my middle school teachers, principals, students. I go back to my high school, and they have me speak there as well, and speak to younger girls and boys. And you see that after COVID, there's a loss of drive. These kids are losing dreams and aspirations. They don't know what they can do. I mean, after COVID, all they've seen is technology. Let's be honest with ourselves. What are we going to do about that? They don't know that they can become doctors and scientists. All they see is sports. We're still tackling that idea. So it's just like, what can we do as people right now to help them learn how to dream again? Learn how to see what they can be, on everyday lives. So, like I said, I'm willing to help if you guys have any ideas. I would luckily be, I'm a senior as well, but I can help. So, whatever you need, let me know. But yeah.
Thank you so much. That's so great. Absolutely.
Say something. So, you know what's so crazy about that? I always hear the same story all the time about parents going out of their way to find resources. And it's crazy that parents have to find resources that their kid lives in a community, an environment where there's teachers around that are being paid to be teaching our kids and to foster towards their learning and their thinking what they're going to be in the future. And so, number one, making sure that we are having these discussions. Discussions are great, but we also need to have that action. We need to stand on what we say. And so, something that I think would be a great resource for our community, especially my mother being a teacher. She's no longer a teacher there, but she was a teacher at Templeton. The reading and writing, we can have resources where there's tutoring after schools for those students. So if we can come together, not only discussing it, but working in the community and being a part of that community to help and take time out of our day to open up tutoring sessions, even if it's for an hour. An hour can do so much if you're consistent in it. So having tutors for math and reading outside of school and also inside of school, and also emailing press. Press is a very important thing. I think most of the things that I've done in this community wouldn't have been as much as an outreach as it was if I didn't have press. So make sure you're emailing press, ABC News, all those people, emailing them. I mean, people from Kansas are looking at what we've done. People outside of Indiana are looking at what we've done because of press. Constantly researching and doing your studies. There's no, oh, are you for this or are you against it? It's what can we do to better the system? What can we do? How can we be active? And the best way to be active is actually stepping in the community and seeing what's around you, doing researching and studying, things of that nature. So, yeah.
I just said I wanted to push back on one idea that I said. There have been studies done that show that Black parents actually spend the most time with their kids, reading, working on schoolwork outside of school. So I think that's amazing, and I think as Black people, we should continue that. But also, this isn't just on the parents, and nobody has said that, but I just want to make it clear that Black parents are fighting so hard with their kids already, and they're doing the work. But if you're working with your kid and then sending them into a school that's not putting that same work into them, then we're not going to get anywhere. And so, yes, looking at what we can do individually, but also thinking about this is a system that's working to not educate Black and brown students. This is a whole system that we need to work against and able for our Black and brown students to be able to get the education that they deserve. So thinking what we can do individually, yes, but also thinking how as individuals we can come together to push against the whole system. But I just want to say that. And also to wrap up and summarize some of the points that were said today. Would this be best? Can y'all see? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so first, kind of thinking about who can we have a conversation with, something small as having a conversation. We can talk with representatives, school board members, on what we as a community need and what we are looking for. So being able to advocate those ideas to school board members and being able to talk in our community with community members and being able to bring those ideas forward. Also communicating and building relationships with future board members. Again, thinking about supporting some of our Black school board members, future Black school board members, thinking about how can we build relationships and grow our networks, and supporting those candidates when they are running for policies that we agree with. And then go to people where they are, thinking about going to some of the communities that maybe their voices aren't being heard and we want to include those voices. And then kind of our second big idea is policy change and finding resources. So what policies can we put in place to get our teachers and staff trained in order to be able to work with our Black and brown students and uplift them and get them an equal education? And then how are we making sure that we're going back to our community and getting that feedback and getting that input on what policies we need and what changes we want to see? So yes, so I think that's a summary of all of our kind of big group session ideas. Do we all feel comfortable with that? Yeah. And also some of the other personal commitments that we made too, thinking about those. Then, okay. Thank you.